Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on your time zones. Thank you so much for joining us today for this International Roundtable on Indigenous Children's Voices and Rights, implementing the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child by encouraging Indigenous children's voices. My name is Haifa Aziz. I'm the legal officer for the Voices of Future Generations, and I'll be acting as the moderator and the Zoom operator for today. I'll now hand over to Dr. Odette Laura, who'll introduce herself and act as a moderator as well.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening again, depending on where you are. And thank you so much for joining us. My name is Odette Lara, and I am the Global Program Officer for the Voices of Future Generations initiative. Today, on the World's Indigenous Peoples Day, we bring together children and youth from different countries and experts who are working to promote Indigenous people's rights and children's rights for an interactive dialogue to raise awareness and to speak up for Indigenous children's rights and the global sustainable development goals. Today, we will also celebrate the global launch of Finding the Language by Adeline Newman-Ting, the first of the Voices of Future Generations Indigenous child author. Today's event will be chaired by Professor Marie-Claire Cordoni-Seger, Leverhulme Trust Visiting Professor at the University of Cambridge, Senior Director of the Center for the International Sustainable Development Law, Executive Secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change COP26 Climate Law and Governance Initiative, and full Professor of Law, School of Environment, Entrepreneurship and Development at the University of Waterloo. She has authored and edited over 22 books and over 140 papers on law, governance, sustainability, and she serves as Executive Secretary to the International Commission of Voices of Future Generations Children's Initiative. Our second chair would be Nishan Gunasekera. He is the lead counsel for peace, justice, and governance at the Center for International Sustainable Development Law. He's an educator, coach, facilitator, and lawyer from Sri Lanka. Nishan is a counselor of the World Future Council and a member of the Education Commission for the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Nishan is committed to bring communities together for environmental protection, healing, and conservation through the use of intergenerational, holistic, and experiential learning. And Professor Cordoni-Seger, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thanks to everyone who has joined us online today. I've been looking forward to this roundtable and to Addie's book launch and to Bella's chance to meet all of you for so long. It is really wonderful to see you here with us and to be able to celebrate together an incredible achievement by an amazing child, and really by an amazing circle of children all over the world. It is even more meaningful to be able to do this on a day that people are remembering, celebrating, and committing to work together worldwide for the rights of Indigenous people, and especially in our case, for Indigenous children's voices. We are very, very happy to have so many people joining us here online today. And I am really greatly appreciating, especially that people are starting to introduce themselves. I can see people on the questions and answers and on the chat who have just said hello from Barbados, from Palestine, from London, from all over the world. And I would like to encourage everybody who has joined us, including the speaker who has just joined, the leader who has just joined from the Squamish people on the west coast of what is known as British Columbia, Canada, Carrie Mahman. And please encourage everyone to say hello and say where you're joining from on the chat as we welcome you. Without saying more right now, I'm going to turn to my co-chair, Nishan Gunasekera, to greet you. And then right away, we will ask a truly honorable and distinguished person who has kindly joined us, our elder, Sherry Kopanase, to give us an opening prayer. And we are truly grateful that you have joined us today, Sherry, and thank you so much for being here with us in this strange online world that we are now in. in order to still celebrate Addie's achievement and the service and engagement of Bella and Sydney and all of the Indigenous youth leaders and elders and mentors who are here online. Nishan?
Aibowan, Vanakkam, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much, Professor Maricla, and for the wonderful introduction, Dr. Ditlar. It's a great honor to be here at such a crucial period of our shared history, where our young people of today is showing the way how the rights of current generations connect with the duties that we have towards future generations. For me, it's a great honor to be here, and I look forward to learning from these young champions and their authorship as we try to communicate a message across cultures of our Indigenous wisdom to the next generation. My comments are brief. I look forward to the discourse in the next couple of hours. And as Marie-Claire said, I look forward to engaging in the prayer from our wonderful elder, Sherry. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I am truly honored and grateful to be able to introduce the elder Sherry Kopanase, who will lead the prayer to open. Born and raised in the Ojibwe community of Onigaming, Elder Sherry Kopanase is known for her experience in Indigenous social services, as well as embracing her Anishinaabe traditions. Currently employed at the University of Manitoba in the MSW Indigenous Knowledges Program, Elder Sherry Kopanase holds a master's in social work, which has enabled her to effectively help her community. She has offered and hosted coming of age teachings and ceremonies for young Anishinaabe women. Moreover, she has helped with the GCT3 Women's Council work on developing a water declaration. So she is well knowledgeable about the kinds of sustainability issues that everyone here cares about as well. She is a board member at the Wiji Idiwag, Ikewewag, and Animiki Ozozon Family Services. And I apologize, Sherry, if I've just mangled the name. And she has over 25 years of experience working in Indigenous social services. She is a rising voice for her Indigenous community, and we are truly grateful that she has kindly agreed to give the prayer. Thank you.
Aha, de nem magnetag nijo sek sagama kwe wase asamuk digo hatik totem. Keganing digit degree on the mingi tijong big ego. Awesema kat konag waitige hinine gipugo senema sema chasat waiga jabin kamagak. Wege migun kat konag mingenga bugo senema guino wene chuich ea chuisu kageat nungum. Waiga in the BK gunje benochio go estigo ge kaije ajoet the botch moat that to go estigo ge gi mazan egen nan gi je bi moat kwatish awa wanga mi gwachi anga bugo cinema waiga gajat zit manitu chigo tapenat men sema estigo ge ke mamo ninge nan so gi je kaba batta kanit o kinige go gi mini go inchon dat zi wai kana ma ge nan nebe nichin mishkite mi gwacha chindina Waskuge picture join a mat benochion, never chop chindina. Why get out so can against one down the Makaya, why wabanu, shawnum, not a bit not to it, no mother's beneath the king be found. Kaya what they win on the cinema, watch built up in ox, I much very to cause what. Why no gunga in the big cave, when you benuchio, why they win no guys the botch water, Wai gang mi gwachio benes yug mego gabes asig in the mat oi di gemium big chigat kanishna hapuche away kemamu ninge nan nikit nige hapuche Got to get to mego mitishinge bilu soka gerat nungum bis asig in the mat oi the best the non the way when I come back it what the spebeka menochi nani miguan why one jagana shimon Kanishna gain kinaoyan sittazi mize man nungum miznatis chigen ma kinga yao boitigen gamkin. Aha pchimi gwach kitin ninim and subebe jigoig oiwa nijagana shimon. Greetings, all of my relatives. I spoke in my original language, Anishinaabe, when that was the way that I was taught to honor and ask those spiritual beings to come and be with us, even through this television, this video. Um, they're so kind and forgiving, you know, in the ways that we adapt to today's world. But my I have three Anishinaabe names. I belong to the Elk Clan, and I also work for that Good and Kind-Hearted Lodge, that Medewan Lodge, sometimes referred to as the Grand Medicine Society. I have in my hand some tobacco here. I also asked my friend Wayne to put some tobacco on some clean ground for all of us, for that tobacco to lead us in a good way. And I'm also holding an eagle fan, because everything that I say needs to be from my spirit, my heart, and my truth as to what I'm speaking for these children today, and the work that they've embraced and undertaken on behalf of all of us today. And it's even beyond this video, because I said, you know, there's people from all over the world on this video, on Turtle Island, across the sea, overseas, and they're listening to our children, and the words and the stories that they've written down. So they're actually passing their stories on to us now. That's what they're doing. So I really want to thank them for that. I also want to acknowledge that good and kind-hearted spirit that gave us everything we need to live life, to take a little bit of this tobacco, that earth, our mother, to come and take this tobacco as well, because her as well, she gives us everything we need to sustain our life. She gives us teachings, what some people call education. She gives us food, she gives us water, she gives us medicine. And this is what some of the stories that you're going to hear today about all of that. And I also ask those spirits that sit at the four winds, the earth, the sky, and the water realm, and all of the spirits that are your helpers, that are these children's helpers, and everywhere that you come from, in whatever way that that way of life that was gifted to you. I ask them to come and take this tobacco and to look upon me in a kind and good way, all of us here. And where I am in Winnipeg, Manitoba, it just started raining quite a bit. I could hardly hear people because I'm sitting in my vehicle at this moment while I'm joining you here. And I acknowledge those thunder beings for being so kind to us, because we know the earth needs water right now. We all need water. The earth is suffering right now, and I'm so grateful for those thunderbirds to come and share their water to cleanse earth and to cleanse us, and to give her a little drink, And it's still raining here, so I thank them for bringing their medicine, to all of us. And yeah, for all of us, it's just for me to, for all of those spirits to help support the work that these young people are doing for us. And for us as Anishinaabe people, our children always had a voice. Of course, that was disrupted for us, but I'm glad to see it being, their voices being renewed, because our true governance, everyone had a voice. Everyone, didn't matter what age, all ages had a voice. So Kchimigwech, I'm honored to be here, and I'll hand it over to the moderator. And I just want to ask for forgiveness because I need to step out for about an hour, but I'll come back in and join you. And yeah, I just I let the organizers know that, but I will be back. And Kchimigwech, and it'll be a really good couple of hours here and beyond this, because the work will continue beyond what is shared with us today by these children and these young people. So Kchimigwech.
Thank you very, very much, Elder Sherry Kopinase. And of course, it's no trouble at all that you come in and out. We understand you have many, many things, many people who depend on you. We greatly appreciate this opening prayer. we have been assured that it is not normal to try to do a territory acknowledgement when you're all in different countries and you're online virtual. But I would hope that everybody who has joined us today can briefly just take a moment in their own hearts to acknowledge the territory where they are finding themselves today, and to acknowledge the peoples who have shared that territory, who have stewarded those places and those communities. I will now also be very, very happy to go to the very important and exciting and incredibly marvelous news for today, which is, of course, the launch of Addie's first book. As you know, we have a special and beautiful book for the Voices of Future Generations' first Indigenous child author. And joining her online is also Bella Morris-Whiskey, who is the first Indigenous child ambassador as a award winner and silver medalist in the story competition. And she has been an incredible ambassador together with her grandfather and her community. So I will welcome and greet Addie and also Bella. Addie is going to read to us briefly from her book and speak to us a little bit for the launch of her book. And then Bella will also be speaking as child ambassador. First, in order to introduce Addie, Adeline Sophie Newman-Ting lives in Victoria, BC. She began to write Finding the Language at age 9 and finished it when she was 10. On her father's side, she's Kwawaka Wako and Coast Salish, as well as English, Irish, and Scottish. On her mother's side, she is Chinese from Taiwan. Her Indigenous name is Kisuhilakwo, meaning leader of people, and her Chinese name is Ting Li Wen, meaning pretty flower cloud. Addie has found the responsibility of being the first Indigenous UNESCO Voices of Future Generations Partnership and Children's Initiative child author both challenging and rewarding, and she hopes that this book will raise awareness for the climate and the importance to saving Indigenous languages and cultures. And I'm going to introduce and recognize at the same time, as part of this this congratulations and this ceremony, Bella Morris-Whiskey, who was born in Edmonton, Alberta, and is a member of the Saddle Lake Cree Nation. She is Indigenous Child Ambassador for the Voices of Future Generations Children's Initiative. She has been recognized for her outstanding writing talents through school awards, and she wishes to be a writer in the future. She was also awarded in 2020 the Global News Woman of Vision program, making her the youngest woman of vision ever. This program celebrates the accomplishments of outstanding women in Alberta. She's also interested in veterinary sciences and in construction, which is just absolutely brilliant. I'm going to recognize someone who wasn't able to join us yet today. She may be logging in later. A second Indigenous child ambassador, Sydney Winter. She is from the Ganagda Frog clan of the Nisga'a Nation and Haisla Nation in northern British Columbia. She is also Indigenous Child Ambassador for the Voices of Future Generations Children's Initiative and an Earth Ranger, where she enjoys completing environment-saving missions to help save animals and the planet. So I want to recognize that Sydney is part of our team and has been sending some marvelous speeches and blogs and participating in different climate strikes and other things with the rest of the children all across the world, even if her internet connection does not recover and she isn't able to join us today. Now I would like to especially thank and welcome Addie, who is absolutely amazing and has kindly agreed to speak to us today about the book that is being launched. Addie?
Good morning. And I'll cue up your speech, okay? Here we go. You can start. Yeah, that's fine. That's good. Yeah, start.
Hello, my name is Adeline Newman-Ting. My traditional name is Kesu Galakwa. My Chinese name is Jing Li Wen. On my father's side, I'm Kwakwaka'wakw and Coast Salish. On my mother's side, I'm Chinese from Taiwan. Today, I'm speaking from the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples. I'm going to read 3 chapters from my new book and then share thoughts. Namba 1. This is the story of two friends, Casey, Kalakwa, and Bob, who came together with their animal friends to help save the environment and the Indigenous languages at the same time. Casey Kalakwa, who goes by the nickname Casey, has long brown hair the color of the forest floor, dark brown eyes like the color of an oak leaf in fall, and skin the color of honey. Bob has reddish orange hair, like the last color a maple leaf turns before it falls from a tree. Blue eyes like the color of sky at daytime, and freckles. They have been good friends for a long time and both care deeply about animals and the environment. One day, Casey and Bob, who were having a sleepover, woke up in Casey's very old wooden house that had been painted with clockwork designs by Casey's great-great-grandfather. Her father had always wanted to go over the old faded paint with new paint, but he'd never found the time. Casey lived with her parents and grandparents in a large house in a medium-sized town that was filled with a bunch of big totem poles. The town was surrounded by forest and ocean, quite far away from the closest big city. The children headed downstairs for breakfast. They had been up late playing and having a party where no adults were allowed. When they got to the kitchen, they asked Casey's parents if they could go and play in the forest after they ate. Casey's mom said they could, so they gobbled up their breakfast like bears waking from hibernation. They got on their coats and shoes and ran out the door into the forest. They tromped through the forest as loud as a pack of wolves. Eventually, they came across something mysterious that they had never seen before. It looked as if someone or something had created a secret place out of branches and trees. Curious, they parted the branches and went inside. Malba 2. Once inside the secret location, Casey and Bob stood there for a few minutes, amazed by what they saw in front of them. They were standing in a giant ring. The ground was a mossy mixture of greens with a sprinkle of light brown color. The trees that made the walls of the ring were very tall, with bark like melted dark chocolate. The leaves and needles and bows up above looked like emeralds and shimmered in the sunlight. In one area, there were 5 little stumps covered in leaves, like stools with leafy cushions. They arranged around a bigger stump that was like a table made by nature. The children decided to sit down and think for a few minutes. Just as they sat down, 2 animals appeared through the leafy circle of trees. The animals came and joined them at the table. "Hi," said Uligan, a wolf cub. "Who are you?" asked Gwaltwina, a young raven. The children were speechless. Could they actually understand what these animals were saying? "Oh my," exclaimed Bob, bewildered as to what was happening. "We had children from the village not too far away," said Casey Galakwa, who was less surprised because she had always heard stories from her grandparents about animals that could talk. Still, when she had run into the forest a few minutes ago, this was not what she had expected to be doing. Yidahwa 3. "Welcome to our house, but what are you doing here?" said Gwaltwina and Uligan together. They were curious because humans rarely visited them. "We are friends. I'm Casey and this is Bob," Casey began to explain excitedly. "We came out today to play in the forest, but saw the entrance somewhere we had never seen before and thought it would be fun to check it out. I promise you, we mean no harm. My grandmother always tells me stories about animals who can talk to people and that we need to respect all animals," she added, just in case the animals were afraid. "Okay, very nice to meet you, Casey and Bob," Gwaltwina said kindly. "I'm Gwaltwina and this is Uligan. Like you, we are very good friends. You see, ravens are creative and fun-loving tricksters, and wolves are natural teachers and pathfinders. In nature, our species often travel together. We've been friends ever since we were a hatchling and a cub. We've been best friends since we were babies, too. In fact, our parents met at a parenting class before we were born, and we've been best friends ever since." Still bewildered, Bob said, "How can we all understand each other, but I can't understand the animals at home?" "That's a good question," said Casey, trying to remember what her grandmother had told her. It's because the land is magical, said Ulig, and people and animals have been taking care of it for a long time. But there are less and less people speaking Quechua, the native language of these lands. The land has invented language over time. When the humans came along, they found the words by the ocean, under rocks, deep in forests, and sometimes in caves, Quechua continued. If we don't take care of the lands, then we will lose the languages too. Land and water are getting polluted by gasoline and rubbish. Forests are being logged in cruel ways. And all of the trees are cut down in one area. It brings sadness like a storm that would never end, Uligan explained sadly. But this can't happen, Casey and Bob cried out together.
So you can say, yes, that's your word.
And that's the end of the reading.
Start there.
The question we ask ourselves as we read the book is, why is it so important for Casey that she learn and speak her traditional language? Language is very important to culture, and at one point in time, the Canadian government thought it was a good idea to take away the language. This was important to me because when my uncle went to residential school, he wasn't allowed to speak his traditional language, Quechua. Now it's up to me and other future generations to learn and speak the language so it isn't lost forever. To save the language, we must also save the land that it came from. We must consider how our actions affect the land. We must take action for change, not sit around and wait for it to happen. How do the land and language connect to the SDGs and UNDRIP? Well, UNDRIP Article 13 is literally the right to language. I have the right to the language that was taken from my uncle. SDG 13 says we should take action for a planet that is clean and stop climate change. Indigenous languages speak about the land they are from, so they are connected. SDG 4 is the right to education. People who lost their language due to residential school should have the right to learn their language. I hope that from reading this book, people learn to take action for a better planet, learn the language, and treat everybody equally. I also hope that they realize the land, language, and culture are all connected, and that to save one, we must also work on saving the others. On the topic of learning to write, I must thank my teachers, Mr. Marta and Mrs. Liddell. Mr. Marta gave me time to write and instilled in me a love of writing. And Miss Liddell taught me how to format my writing and how to piece it together and write a story that flows smoothly and makes sense. I'd like to thank my editor, Alice and Lala, for editing my story so it makes sense and do not have typos. My illustrator, Justine Greenfield, for bringing the characters to life in just the way that I imagined them. Monique Grace Smith for writing such a beautiful forward. My aunties, Marion and Ellen, for writing a preface that connects with both the subject of the book and me personally. Finally, my mom and dad for always supporting me to keep going even when it was difficult and I wanted to quit. And my dog Harriet for being the cutest, most lovable fuzzball ever. Kayla Kasla, Shisha, and thank you.
Everyone is clapping for you, Addie. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. And thank you especially for sharing your book with us. I am now going to happily call upon and introduce Bella, Child Ambassador for the Voices of Future Generations Children's Initiative. And Bella, I've already introduced you, so I'm going to hand the virtual talking stick right to you.
Hello, I'm Bella Morris-Sawiski-Jack. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this event today. I'm very excited. Recently, we all found out about the poor children in residential schools. I was honestly shocked about this news and my teacher told the class about it. It had a great impact on everyone as residential schools were meant to be educational for Indigenous children, but they had fooled their families. I'm wearing my orange shirt today to honor the children who did not come home from residential schools. When I was younger, I was so excited to start school and learn to write my own stories, to read, and to even count. I was so eager to learn and never worried about being hurt or scared of my teachers. I always thought the teachers were always nice and caring no matter what they were teaching. I never thought of them as disrespectful people who are against people of a different race. What those teachers thought back then is nothing like how most teachers think today, which was one of the reasons why I never worried about those things. My orange shirt is very important to me and my family because many family members of mine have experienced residential schools. And the thought of that and the news about those children was really rough for me and my family. Those people in my family who have experienced residential schools have inspired me. Knowing that they're able to go through all of that and still stay strong and happy for their family is really amazing. And they are great role models, and they now support me in what I'm doing to help. I have learned a lot about residential schools, like how 150,000 Inuit, Métis, and Aboriginal children were forced to attend these schools. There was 130 residential schools in Canada, and the first one to open was in Ontario in 1831. The schools were not that hygienic, and children got sick, which led to diseases. They had a very packed schedule. Each day they wake up at 5 and go to bed at 8, and they had probably 17 things to do, including chores, cooking, and cleaning almost everything. They had one 15-minute recess break a day and had an hour and a half of fitness and recreation. I think that people nowadays are getting better at accepting people for who they are. All of my teachers were so supportive of me and treated me with kindness. I believe that the children in residential schools should have been treated the same way. I think that schools on reserve should have the same standards in cities and in larger areas, in other large areas like towns and hamlets. The school standards and materials should be the same around the world and for each culture. Thank you.
Thank you, Bella. That was absolutely brilliant. And thank you especially for facing with unflinching courage and generosity and kindness and hope, one of the probably most frightening things we've all been discussing in the last, in some cases, for decades, and in some cases, just a few months. Thank you. I'm going to turn now to Sydney, who we have also introduced, and invite her to say a few words as Child Ambassador for the Voices of Future Generations Children Initiative. Sydney from Nisga'a Territory.
Sydney Sim Canada ni Bobs Sim San Will with Great Canada. Get like them explodes. Okay. 2 years ago, I submitted my story to the Voice for Future Generations. Now I am a UN Indigenous Child Ambassador. I'm 10 years old and I continue to learn about the rights of Indigenous people and the rights of children. I feel lucky to be a part of this and to be able to have opportunities such as this. I'm thankful to be here today to share with you the importance of Indigenous language and how Indigenous children's views can shape the education and culture sustainability. It's an honor to be here with people that can make a difference for Indigenous children around the world. I believe that this is important to look at what we can do now to make better programs for language and culture. We have the knowledge in our communities. We need the support to bring out the knowledge for our language and culture in place to learn it. We need to have Indigenous people learning their language to be fluent and be able to teach their language. Our languages help us understand our culture, and we need to be able to practice our culture and to feel that we belong to our culture. This is important for Indigenous children to feel that they belong. Our people have not been treated fairly, however, they knew that they did not give up their inherent rights to their land, language, culture, and to their children. I am learning the UN Declaration for Indigenous Rights and created to have Indigenous people's rights acknowledged, that Indigenous people deserve to be treated equally. We are survivors. We still have our language and culture today. We need resources to sustain our culture for our people. We need to give more opportunities to Indigenous children and families focusing on the family because the child's first teachers are the grandparents and parents, then the school system. We need to have systems in place to encourage language and culture. We can do this in schools, at workplaces, at sports centers, wherever Indigenous people may be. I have been taught to be fair by my parents. I have been taught to stay away from places and people where I do not feel safe. 2 simple lessons, but so valuable. So we need to create fairness and we need to create safety within systems so Indigenous people want to be a part of the change. We need to teach all Indigenous children about their rights to be safe and to be treated fairly. We need to teach all Indigenous children they have a right to their culture and language. We need to teach Indigenous children that this is the start to reclaiming our inherited rights. The government needs to support all of the different Indigenous languages with books and learning materials across the world. I feel proud when I can speak my language in school. I feel proud when I can sing and dance my culture. I feel proud when I can practice my culture in feasts. I feel proud to know that I belong to the Nisga'a and Haisla Nation. I want this for all Indigenous people. We deserve this. Doyak Sitneen, and thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Sydney. And the things that you are requesting, really calling for, are very, very important. And I think we all support your action agenda, and we all would commit to it in a heartbeat as we can. That was a wonderful speech. I'm going to now especially congratulate Bella and Sydney for their speeches and for their work as child ambassadors. And of course, especially Addie for her book, which is being launched today, Finding the Language. I'll ask if Antoinette can change the spotlight so that we can see Addie. We're seeing Bella, which is good too. Thank you and congratulations, Bella. And I would like to declare, just to start, that Finding the Language, a creative and captivating story about reclaiming language through the land and its creatures, highlighting the interconnected cycle of life and culture by Adeline Sophie Newman Ting, is officially launched today. Congratulations, Addie. We're going to turn now to 2 very special speakers who have kindly agreed to give the congratulations to you and to celebrate the launch of your book with you. So first, I would like to recognize a very special individual who has joined us today. I first met her as a mentor of Addie's when we were in Victoria. And this is, of course, Miss Monique Gray Smith, Cree, Lakota, and Scottish. She is an award-winning, best-selling author and a very sought-after consultant for anyone listening. Her most recent novel, which I have a beautiful copy of that I was very, very honored to receive, Tilly and the Crazy Eights, was listed for Canada Reads 2021, and her books, including Tilly and the Crazy Eights and others, have won many awards and have been recognized internationally. Her books are used to share wisdom, knowledge, hope, and the important teaching that love is medicine. She is well known for her storytelling, her spirit of generosity, and her focus on resilience. Monique, please will you help us to celebrate Addie's accomplishment today and Bella and Sydney's wonderful work as child ambassadors.
Tansei, much gratitude to be with you today. I'm coming to you from the Lekwungen-speaking People's Territory as well as the West Saanich Territory, and could probably, if my arm was really strong, throw a ball to carry an Addie. But instead I throw you my heart and raise my hands to you and offer much thanksgiving for having the courage to write your story, Addie, and especially for having the courage to put it into the world. Because putting a book into the world it's profound. It really is. And to do it at your age and to have the ability at your age, your chronological age, because I think that you are like an elder in a 10-year-old body, but to do it at your chronological age is remarkable. As well for Bella and Sydney, for your roles, the way that you are being an advocate for the importance of land and language and culture and the water. And within that is the supernatural, our teachings, our values, our beliefs, our stories. And right now, I think in this world, our stories are the medicine we need. And so I'm grateful, Addie, that you've had the courage to put your story into the world, to Bella and Sydney for the stories you're writing and the stories you tell verbally. Because every time we share our stories, whether they're in print like this beautiful book that's just come into the world today, or they're oral, or we write them down, it's like we wake up a part of ourselves. We call the ancestors to help us to share the stories, to wake up other people's hearts and spirits, because that's what we need right now, is to wake up each other's hearts and spirits and minds so that our actions change. The stories will help us change our actions. So this beautiful book, this story you've just put into the world in these last precious moments, Addie, are going to change trajectories. And not only for the children who read the story, but also for the adults who read the story to them as well. That it will change trajectories. And in that is the power of story. It's so incredibly powerful. And so to you three young humans, in your own ways today, you've talked about the importance of kindness, about respect, about fairness, about belonging, that's one of our human needs. No matter where we live in the world, we desire a sense of belonging. And each of you have also talked about the disrupt that has happened in our sense of belonging over the years, based on government policies and legislations and the impact on our families. And so you bring to life in your stories and in your work and in your speeches, and when you stand up in class, when you stand up at school, when you dance, as you said, Sydney, right? When you learn your language, you wake up that love for the land and the water and the stars, our culture and our language. And so just like the blood runs through us, the stories run through the land. And, you know, as Elder Sherry started, and Chi Miigwech to her for laying down the beautiful medicine for today. As she started, you know, the rain was falling. And the rain then runs into the creeks and the rivers and out to the ocean. For all of us to remember that the stories are our way forward. And so much gratitude again to you, Addie, for having the courage to write your story, and so beautifully. I especially love your use of metaphor in the stories, how you remind us in your beautiful story about reciprocity, that when we love and care for the land and the animals, they love and care for us as well. And it's that beautiful reciprocity. And so thank you for that reminder. I loved how you talked about you used like bears waking from hibernation and the color brown like chocolate. So your ability to use metaphors will also help the young readers and their families and teachers connect in a way that's like, oh, I can relate to that. And in our relation to a story allows us to make change. So congratulations to all three of you, young humans, for the important work you're doing at this young age and the important work that your life will unfold. As well, much congratulations and honoring to the families who are with you today. and those who have supported you. Maybe they're not with you present today, but they're supporting you and believing in you and holding you up with dignity. Atakiwas, all my relations.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Monique. You are such a beautiful speaker and such a kind heart, and we're so happy to have you. And Addie, you have the best mentors ever. So thank you to Bella and to Addie and to Sydney. We have one more person who has joined us online today, a slightly older youth who is a leader in her community and has kindly agreed to give the last juice toast, if we will, and congratulations message. Portia Garnon-Williams is joining us today. She is an Indigenous thought leader in the Ottawa Carleton Virtual Secondary School and has just finished grade 12 honors. She took electives in international law and economics, and she's a passionate advocate for Indigenous rights, having partnered with the charity I Love First Peoples to raise awareness and raise funds for Indigenous children living in Northern Canada, learning in developing world conditions. Please, Portia.
Thank you so much. I first want to say what a beautiful congratulatory message. Really, I'm going to restate and add on with a quick message of thanks and a few words to congratulate our panel. And I would like to remind everyone that sitting here at this virtual roundtable today is our future generation of strong Indigenous leaders who are willing to voice the concerns of our worlds and for Indigenous people. And by contributing to this panel and this discussion, you are helping raise awareness to really important issues that we need to address and that our youth have to be a part of. And you are all three very hardworking students, and I speak for everyone when I say we can't wait to see how you'll continue to change the world. So all in all, thank you for sharing your knowledge and your stories with us today.
Thank you. And thank you, Portia, as well. Now, we are joined by a panel of leaders, of youth leaders and other leaders, and also by members of their family who are here with us supporting them. And I can see Carrie and Addie online together, which is wonderful. And I can also see Wayne Garnon-Williams, who is here with us with Portia, but with two different connections, probably in the same house. So I will turn to Wayne as our next speaker to say just a few words about the situation in which we find ourselves at the moment, with some people across Canada only just realizing something that many of us, and of course, especially the Indigenous peoples of Canada, have known for a very long time. And it's a difficult question. And before we move straight into that difficult question, which must be acknowledged, must be discussed, must be raised, I would like to especially thank and recognize Addie's work and Bella's work and Sydney's work. And I would like to say a special thank you to Monique and to Portia for their wonderful congratulations and thanks. And we're going to try something a little bit strange, which is if everyone who is a panelist online could unmute, we're all going to try to clap for you, even though we're online and it's all virtual and etc. Okay, so everybody please unmute, and we're all going to congratulate you. We're going to try. I think Addie could hear everyone clapping. I think Bella and Sydney could hear everyone clapping because they're smiling. And so I think that and raising our hands for all my relations as we did with Monique is the best way that we can acknowledge you in this time when we are all separated. I will now turn to Wayne Garnon-Williams, and I will introduce him briefly and thank him again for joining us and for indeed being a partner with us in this event that we've been organizing and in many other projects and collaborations over the years, Wayne, which we have deeply, deeply appreciated. So To introduce you to him, he is here representing the National 60s Scoop Healing Foundation of Canada as their chair. He's also a senior lawyer and principal director of Garwill Law Professional Corporation that offers litigation, ADR, and commercial corporate services with a particular interest in Aboriginal law, customs, excise, and international trade law. Wayne enjoys resolving challenging civil litigation and corporate commercial law problems that have a mix of Aboriginal law and trade law concepts. And of course, I know him as an incredible speaker, an inspiring friend and mentor, and really someone who has, over the years, done so much for raising not just the voices, but also the sustainability and economic work of Indigenous people across all of our borders. So Wayne, please.
MC, thank you. Thank you, Mary Claire. And authors, dignitaries, young ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting me to speak on this roundtable celebrating Indigenous child voices and rights. If you remember one thing from my talk, it's this: young authors, young ladies and gentlemen, young thought leaders, lead bravely, advocate boldly, and deliver effectively. Well, we celebrate the youthful authors here today. It is my duty and my privilege to remind us why we need to celebrate Indigenous child voices and rights. Canada's history of the treatment of Indigenous children is horrific and a very dark chapter in the Canadian history and should not be forgotten. I will briefly touch upon the topics that have impacted Indigenous children, the residential schools, the 60s Scoop, and today's challenges with respect to Indigenous children and equality. The Indigenous residential school system, it was a mandatory system of boarding schools for Indigenous children. The school system was created to isolate Indigenous children from the influence of their own native culture, the religion, and in order to assimilate them into the dominant Canadian culture. And over the course of this residential school system that expanded over 100 years, around 150,000 children were placed into this residential school system that stripped them of their indigeneity. The number of school-related child deaths remains unknown due to the incomplete records, but it's estimated to be over 30,000 children died at school and were buried in unmarked graves in the yards of these residential schools across Canada. For the child survivors of these schools, there was physical, mental, and sexual abuse of many students at the hands of the teachers and administrators. We've seen in the news the start of the discovery of these unmarked mass graves, which total approximately 1,200 right now and counting across Canada. In the infamous words of Duncan Campbell Scott, who stated on the record in explaining the rationale for suggesting amending the Indian Act that would remove forcibly Indigenous children from their families, he stated, quote, I want to get rid of the Indian problem. I do not think, as a matter of fact, that the country ought to continuously protect a class of people who are unable to stand alone. Our objective is to continue until there is not a single Indian in Canada and has not been absorbed into the body politic. And there is no Indian question and no Indian department, unquote. I also want to touch upon another thing that evolved from the Indian residential schools, and that's the 60s Scoop. I am a product of the 60s Scoop. This is a picture of me as a 3-year-old in the 60s Scoop process. What is the 60s Scoop? The 60s Scoop refers to the next evolution from residential schools. It was the large-scale removal or scooping of Indigenous children from their families, their homes, their communities, and placed into predominantly non-Indigenous middle-class families across the world. From the 60s to the 1980s, the provincial governments considered removal of Indigenous children as the fastest and easiest way of addressing the Indigenous child issues. And between that time period, approximately 25,000 First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children were forcibly removed from their homes. 70% of these children were apprehended and placed into non-Indigenous homes, and the rest of these children floated from foster home to foster home, or lived and grew up in institutionalized care. Both the residential school survivors and the 60 Scoop survivors share the same suffering: the physical, mental, sexual abuse, the deliberate attempt at destroying Indigenous culture, language, and pride by denying our right to live with our Indigenous families and our Indigenous communities. I'm proud to be chair of the National 60 Scoop Healing Foundation of Canada, and our mission is to every day accompany our 60 Scoop survivors and their descendants along a healing journey. We do this through cultural reclamation, holistic wellness, advocacy, commemoration, and education initiatives like the one you are listening to right now. And let's look at what's happening today with our Indigenous children. A term coined by Dr. Jacqueline Maurice, the Millennium Scoop, where today in Canada, 52% of children in foster care are Indigenous. But that only accounts for 7.7% of the child population in Canada that Indigenous people do. So this means out of the 28,000 and some kids in foster care, 14,000 are Indigenous. That's wrong. And let's look another wrong that's out there: the universal standards for child health care and education. Today, Indigenous communities, urban, rural, remote, there's a distinct and clear inequality. And we have a standard, a universal standard of healthcare and education as a national policy, but that's not being respected with respect to Indigenous children. That needs to change. And there is hope on the horizon. You are that hope. And there are instruments at play. The Bill C-92, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Children and Family Youth Act, where there's the principle under that section that there are preferences for, that the children have rights for their preferences to be considered. The Truth and Reconciliation calls for action for child welfare, to provide resources to enable Aboriginal communities and child welfare organizations to keep Aboriginal families together. Let's not forget the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, Article 7, Sub 2, where Indigenous peoples have the collective right to live in freedom, peace, and security as distinct peoples, and not forcibly removing children from that or any group. And of course, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Children, Article 30, that Indigenous children shall not be denied the right in community with other members of their group to enjoy their own culture and to profess their own religion and to use their own language. So in conclusion, I hope to see for the future of Indigenous rights and voices with that whole thing starts with you here, right now. You are our future. You are our future authors, our future thought leaders, and you have the power to make tomorrow a better day. And your authorship and your penmanship and your thoughts will lead the way. So in closing, remember, lead bravely, advocate boldly, deliver effectively. A privilege. Thank you.
Thank you as well, Wayne, and thank you especially for reminding and for so clearly explaining in a way that is essential for everyone who is listening, everyone who cares about these issues, everyone who wants to work together to change the reality that we find ourselves in. Thank you for being there and being willing to take our hands and to take the hands of everyone who has joined us here online today, and everybody else who has to learn and has to understand and has to help. And I really want to especially thank the kind words of those who are intervening right now in the Q&A and in the chat to congratulate you, to congratulate Portia, and also to celebrate the children who have joined us and who have become part of this circle, and such an amazing part of the circle that they are. Speaking of the circle, we are now very, very happy to be joined online by a group of leaders, of thought leaders, of people who have taken it on themselves, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, to help to try to address these issues and to care for our world and for the sustainability of our world, just as Addie is calling for in her book, and Bella and Sydney are calling for in their speeches. And so I am going to turn over to my co-chair, Nishan Gunasekara from Sri Lanka, who will be able to chair the next part, which is the roundtable. And we have agreed as a group, since one of the other child ambassadors who is walking this road as much as he can, together with Bella and Sydney and Addie and his friends, to reverse the order so that the child ambassador will speak first, and then some of the youth and the older mentors and others. So I'm going to turn over to Nishan to introduce one of the child ambassadors who is joining with Bella and Sydney and Addie and others in their struggle.
Thank you very much, Mark-Claire. Again, a great honor to be connecting. As I attempt to introduce these wonderful speakers in our roundtable, I think I draw on the spiritual wisdom of the elder Sherry, who talked about that this event today connects the voices of all generations. And I think in that spirit, I would also like to welcome some of the other friends and young leaders who are connecting from various parts of the world, including young leader from Palestine, who's now currently in Jordan. Afnan Dawood, welcome to you as well, Afnan. And thank you for connecting with this wonderful group, and we welcome you as well. As Marie-Claire said, this roundtable has raised 3 specific questions, and I would read out those 3 questions and then invite our wonderful speakers and their bios very shortly. So the 3 questions was: 1, on the International Day of the World's Indigenous Peoples, how to celebrate and encourage Indigenous children's books and stories. And the second question is: why are Indigenous languages so important? And how can Indigenous children's views shape education and culture for sustainability worldwide? And finally, one of the wider questions: how to foster implementation of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which promises that children's voices will be heard in decision-making that concerns them, and how to inspire people worldwide to help advance the global sustainable development goals, engaging and learning from Indigenous peoples in sight. So on to our wonderful first speaker is Master Nico Roman, who most of you already know is a UN Child Ambassador of the Rights of the Child and the Sustainable Development Goals. He advocates to help protect nature and the rights of future generations, both locally and at the global scale. He is also the chair of the Cambridge School of Eco Council, with kids from many schools in the United Kingdom, through speeches in international and local conferences and events, hosting online eco seminars, mini series about the SDGs, and helping to organize Cambridge climate strikes. Nico is trying to raise awareness and educate about sustainability locally and globally. Nico, wonderful to see you again. Over to you to lead the way for this roundtable discussion. Nico.
Thank you very much. It's brilliant to be able to join you today online in this roundtable, standing up for our present and for our future. I'd quickly like to acknowledge that I'm currently located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin people. I volunteer as a UN Child Ambassador for the SDGs with the Voices of Future Generations Children's Initiative. As part of this commitment, I edit an online blog, Nico's Natural World, with over 9,000 impressions and hundreds of followers. I've been working together with Addie, Bella, and Sydney as Indigenous child leaders, and I especially wish to congratulate Addie on the launch of her first book. Her story is amazing, she is amazing, you all are, and it is a privilege to be your friend. Together, we stand for our children's rights as reflected in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, especially Articles 24 and 29, that promise us the healthy environment and education about nature. Also Article 12 to 13 that guarantee us a voice in decisions that concern us. Our future and the futures of all species on Earth concern us. They really do. Our future in the I might be only a child, but I know that advancing the world's SDGs, especially SDG 13 on climate action and SDG 15 to protect life on land, makes the difference between a terrible global nightmare and the future we want. We are all speaking out together to ask everyone to wake up. Even as our whole world faces the global COVID-19 pandemic, we can and must still speak out for our Earth and for future generations of all species. Climate change and biodiversity loss are real, dangerous, and urgent. As children, we are trying very hard to be heard, locally and globally, to stop the suffering and losses from getting even worse. The CRC promises us a healthy environment, and this right means that the willful destruction of natural habitats without any regard for the plants and animals, nor for all future generations, just needs to stop. We must make sure our leaders tackle the climate and biodiversity crisis with strength and unity, and learn how to protect and include everyone, especially Indigenous voices. We can't just ignore problems until everything is just too late. If we want to make a difference, we must scale up our understanding, our education, and our voices. We need new guardian laws, institutions, and networks. The world after the pandemic needs to take children's fears and interests much more seriously, especially needs of all of us to be able to work together as children and to respect and listen to Indigenous children like my friends Addie, Bella, and Sydney, and youth like others in this roundtable. I am pleading for every single leader in all areas of our economy and society, including everyone listening online, to help us find new ways to stop the urgent threats of climate change, biodiversity loss, and to respect the rights of all children, just as you promised in the SDGs. Our rights are being directly infringed by current policies, laws, and decisions, locally, nationally, and internationally. Even the smallest child can make a big difference towards a more sustainable world for all of us. Thank you.
Wonderful, Nico. Thank you very much for that powerful message of hope and sharing your insights. And we wish you all the strength as you continue on this inspirational journey. So thank you again. I now turn to Miss Portia Garner-Williams, which you have already heard, but I have the pleasure of introducing her again. She's an Indigenous student thought leader in the Ottawa Carleton Virtual Secondary School. Currently as a grade 12 honors student taking electives in international law and economics. She's a passionate advocate for Indigenous rights, having partnered with the charity I Love First Peoples to bring awareness to and raise funds for Indigenous children living in Northern Canada, learning in developing world conditions. Ms. Portia Garner-Williams, over to you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Yes, and great points, Nico, for your presentation. Talking about Indigenous voices and education are so important. And I want to kind of branch off of that in what I want to talk about. And I'm going to start with a little bit of a personal story. When I was 10 years old, a history teacher at my school taught me and my classmates that Indigenous people were a thing of the past, only spotted on reservations and not really existing, only in percentages of people's DNA. So when I came to school one day showing off my regalia and my braids, this teacher gave a full lecture to a classroom of 10-year-olds on why I was not who I claimed to be, Indigenous. Indigenous students are so underrepresented in schools, and this has horrible effects on the mental well-being and academic success of Indigenous students. For example, instead of being taught about modern Indigenous culture and perspective, students are often taught about Indigenous culture in the past tense alone. This implies Indigenous culture is dying, which is exactly what I experienced in schools. Schools are also not doing enough to educate Indigenous children about their culture, both on and off reserves. In many rural and remote areas, for example, school materials taught in English, despite some Indigenous students' first language often not being English in those areas. And as a result of a lack of representation in the classroom, students perform worse academically. The gap in high school completion rates between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadian students is close to 15 percentage points. That's the difference between an A and a B minus in Ontario. So what I want to inform you all of today is that we are living in an Indigenous education crisis, and we have been for decades. And to solve this education crisis, Indigenous people need to reclaim education, to teach traditional ways of life, land, and language. When it comes to life, this means teaching traditional knowledge, such as fishing, trapping, beating, braiding, and so much more. For land, this means teaching how Indigenous people regard the land, teaching Indigenous worldviews that are still alive and well today. And finally, teaching language. Indigenous languages, they carry values of Indigenous culture and Indigenous people. And by teaching these ways of life in schools, we can preserve Indigenous cultural practices while also providing real representation for Indigenous students in the classroom, thus helping students feel a sense of belonging within their school and, most importantly, with themselves. But for non-Indigenous students, we have to do something very similar. We have to teach them modern Indigenous perspectives alongside historical Indigenous ones, because both of them have to go hand in hand in the school curriculum. And by doing so, we're not only supporting the Sustainable Development Goal for quality education by ensuring an inclusive and equitable education and promoting lifelong learning opportunities for all, we're also supporting many other Sustainable Development Goals, such as decent work and economic growth, no poverty, good health and well-being, and reduced inequalities. Now, I'll discuss a little bit of progress that's been made in recent years. It's been very positive. First Nations have partnered with school boards to alter curriculums to benefit Indigenous students. For example, in Ontario, the grade 11 English course is now only teaching Indigenous books by Indigenous authors, using Indigenous worldviews as a basis for interpreting the novels and essay writing, which is huge progress in the right direction, but there is still a lot more work left to do to have Indigenous people reclaim education. And I'm happy to say that Indigenous student leaders are becoming the forefront of this movement. I want to leave off by saying I hope that through this discussion, educators and most importantly, Indigenous youth here today can identify those educational gaps in their institutions and maybe become the leaders or just a part of this movement for Indigenous students. It's so important that we provide an inclusive and equitable education for Indigenous students. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how Indigenous educators, students, and especially leaders help in implementing traditional ways of life, land, and language into their curriculums. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Portia, for that powerful message, and incredible to see you bringing your own journey as an example to kind of highlight the structural challenges faced by Indigenous children and Indigenous families within the educational system that we have in place. And I think reclaiming your space and right to bring back the Indigenous educational system to the mainstream education structures we have, I think is a very important point as we try to connect the wisdom from the ages across this generation to the next. So thank you for what you're doing, and we wish you all the very best, and please be in touch in this next discussion as well. So thank you, Portia. On to our next speaker, we have Dr. Edward Van Dalen, who is a researcher and a lecturer specialized in international children's rights. He holds a PhD in public international law from the University of Geneva and is currently a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Human Rights and Legal Pluralism at the McGill University. His thesis on the participation of working children in the making of international child labor law was awarded the 2021 Law and Society Association Dissertation Prize. Dr. Van Dalen, great pleasure to have you with us. Over to you.
Thank you, Nishan. Let me start by saying that I'm very honored to have been invited to participate in this very important event. And I will use my 4 minutes to raise a couple of points on the children's right to participate. But first, I have to say that I arrived in Canada only a couple of months ago. I am from the Netherlands, and I have to admit that Indigenous children's rights are not my specialty. And so I'm most grateful to be here today and to learn so much from so many different and inspiring people, especially the younger ones amongst us. It's been really amazing to listen to you. Now, during my stay here, the news broke of the horrific discovery of mass graves at the different residential schools. And of course, this installed also in me a deep sense of sadness and anger. But as a researcher interested in children's rights, the news also immediately sparked many questions, especially about the kind of culture and system that can allow for such horrible children's rights violations to occur in such a systemic way over such a long time. And I wonder how much of that culture and system is still currently preventing Indigenous children from enjoying their rights in the way that they themselves want. In my own work, I rely on the idea of children's living rights. This means as much as acknowledging that children often form their own ideas about their rights based on their daily lives and struggles. And when it comes to a children's right to participate, I believe it's important for us adults to be careful with assuming that we know best what the right kind of participation is. And so I would like to raise 3 points based on some of the research and writing that I've done over the last few years. And the first point is to see participation as more than just giving a voice to. When it comes to children's participation, much of the focus is on the idea of creating a formal space for children to be able to speak out, to have a voice. And while this is no doubt very important and can be a very powerful experience for everyone involved, like we've seen today, I think that a too narrow focus on children's participation as giving a voice also risks risks hiding the many ways in which children participate all the time, at school, at home, or in the streets, and they act to deal with all kind of difficult circumstances and situations to help themselves and their friends and families. Now, my second point builds on the first, and that is to also take serious children's disobedience and resistance as important ways of participating. Children do not always exercise their right to participate in the way that adults like it, and I think that is okay. One obvious example is, of course, Greta Thunberg's refusal to go to school to raise awareness about climate change. But there are many more difficult examples, such as the often violent political activism of children in Palestine, or children who decide to stop school to work instead to help their families. And even though these situations often challenge our ideas about what a childhood should look like, I believe they should be taken serious as ways in which children exercise their right to participate, to shape and transform their lives. And the third and final point is to put more participation. Now, children have been structurally ignored by those who research and write our histories, but this doesn't mean that they haven't left traces for us to find and to understand. In my own work, I discovered how important working children themselves have been in the making of international child labor law for more than a century. So these stories are there if we are willing to find them. And to come back to the residential schools, of course, these children were victims of powers and interests much greater than them. But people are rarely only victims. I am sure that there are many stories of how these children stuck together and found ways to resist and to survive. And I think it's crucial to discover and tell these stories, as I believe that they are just as important. Now, I will leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful points, Edward, and bringing your kind of knowledge and research ongoing on the current challenges facing children. I think perhaps I think you mentioned that you've not really focused on Indigenous children as yet, but there are wonderful resources around the table with you, Portia, Elena, Nico, and the others who are doing this work. But we could also look at maybe bringing them. Perhaps you could host them at McGill and then connect their work with some of your research work if there is scope and time. But I think it'll be a fascinating area how kind of a intergenerational attempt is made on children's rights. So thank you again. Dr. Van Dalen, from all of us. And the fourth speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is Ms. Charlene Babejigik, who is an Algonquin Anishinaabe and is the Program and Outreach Coordinator of the Kawartha World Issues Center. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Indigenous Studies and Philosophy from Trent University. Charlene, over to you.
Ani Mbosho, Shaylin Wabagishik Indigenous, Nanote was a win to Miskaming Donjaba, Atik and Dodem, Ninjikaning and Donjaba, meanwhile, Noko Chiwanang Ndida. So I said, hello everyone, my name is Shaylin Wabagishik. I said in Anishinaabe that my family is from Temiskaming First Nation and Caribou Clan, and I'm also German and Irish. And I grew up in Rama First Nation, and I currently live in Nogojiwanang, also known as Peterborough, which is the traditional territory of the Michisagi Anishinaabe. And I am a treaty person through Treaty 20 and the Williams Treaties here where I live. I want to say Chimigwech, a big thank you to everyone here, for all the organizers, for having me in this virtual space. I want to say happy International Day of the World's Indigenous Peoples. One way I'm going to celebrate is to spend time with my nephew and my little sisters to teach them about this day and what it means and how it's connected to what's happening in the world. I invite you to do the same with the children in your life. Teach them more about Indigenous peoples where you're from. And if you are Indigenous, teach them more about themselves and their own cultural stories and history. And taking this time can plant seeds for them to be compassionate and confident in themselves and what they stand for. Indigenous children's books are a really great way to celebrate because they teach us and remind us the basic truths about the world in a very loving and relatable way. Children's stories hold wisdom and speak for future generations. It's so important to engage in these conversations with each other and the young ones who inherit the world. I also want to talk about Indigenous peoples and especially Indigenous children, how we have the most unique and intimate relationships with our homelands. The participatory, land-based education, community-centered wellness, our relationships with the land, and governance models based on respect for the gifts of each person and Mother Earth and all our relations, which needs to be central in efforts to build more equitable and sustainable communities. Indigenous languages are so important because they set the foundation for our worldviews. The way that we relate to things is reflected in our language. For example, how we call the sun our grandfather and the moon our grandmother, in which we refer to them as our relatives, our family members that have their own spirit and rights and can teach us so much. It's so important to me personally to take the time to learn and speak my language, Anishinaabe, and pass that on to my children one day, because when we speak our language, we're fulfilling the prayers of our ancestors to keep living and speaking as Anishinaabe people, even after all we've endured from Canada's colonialism. So to foster the implementation of the SDGs and the UN UNCROC, I really believe that education and leaving no one behind and implementing UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, is key. Education is needed to teach community members how they can connect and contribute to global goals and know their rights are internationally binding. Education builds awareness and accessibility of these goals, which will advance them. Also, the principle of leaving no one behind is so important, as it's central in the SDGs. Solutions need to be created by the people they are for. This means investing and empowering marginalized communities to speak for themselves, which involves building relationships and centering them in the processes and decision-making. Finally, implementing UNDRIP will provide capacity for Indigenous peoples to revitalize their cultures, languages, and knowledge systems. It will strengthen Indigenous nations and bring them to a place where they can move past focusing on surviving injustices and have space to focus on healing and solving complex problems that they have a unique proximity to. The people and knowledge needs to be centered in finding solutions in their own territories. Last, understanding the connections between all these issues and uniting until we are all safe and can enjoy everyone's rights and freedoms is so important. So Chimigwech to the youth and everyone here today who are inspiring hope in everyone around you and connecting people to these issues and their solutions on a personal level. We are making a difference, and I'm so grateful to everyone who's using our voices to make this world a better place. I'm so inspired by this conversation and this most important work, the creators' work. Say Chimigwech, thank you for having me here today.
Thank you very much, Charlene. Wonderful points. But what touched me most is how you started, simplifying that we should spend time with our children, sharing stories, trying to connect what we know across the cultures. And in Sri Lanka, we are in the last generation of our indigenous peoples. And I think another 5 to 10 years, we will not have any longer living amongst us. And it just drives home the point about the fact that the indigenous culture, the history, the language is also connected to the land, which is very much the songs that are being sung or the words that have been written. So thank you for sharing the wisdom of the sun, the grandfather, the moon, the grandmother with us as well. And thank you for your work. Ladies and gentlemen, now I have the great pleasure of bringing on our final speaker for the roundtable. It's Miss Elena Cox. Miss Elena is a proud Métis woman and a recent graduate from the University of Guelph in the honors on environmental governance and minors in political science and geographic information systems and environmental analysis. She is beginning her master's in sustainability management this September and has the honor of working on a research team at the university based on First Nations treaties and the Sustainable Development Goals. Elena is an advocate and volunteer in Indigenous and LGBTQ2S+ rights and has a passion for advocating for Indigenous-based conservation. Elena, pleasure to have you with us. Over to you.
Hello, and miigwech for that wonderful introduction. I would like to first acknowledge that I am here situated on the land of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. So I would definitely just like to bring thanks to those people and the ancestors for allowing me to be here today. I would like to say that Indigenous children's books, especially the wonderful one that was released today, and stories like that should be celebrated and encouraged, not just during Indigenous History Month or on the International Day of the World's Indigenous Peoples, but year-round. And I think that this can simply be done just by listening respectfully to the wisdom and teachings of all Indigenous people. Children are a gift from the Creator, and they grow up with a sense of belonging and following the teachings of their parents and elders. Children are vital to keeping Indigenous cultures alive in the future and restoring life to their communities. Allowing children a voice provides them with skill sets to protect the vitality of both the environment and their cultures in the future. And this should be encouraged by listening to what youth have to say and involving them more in society and decision-making. Indigenous languages are so important as they preserve culture that is centuries old, one that respects life and nature as equal partners. Cultural and environmental knowledge has been passed on orally from generation to generation through Indigenous languages to Indigenous children of the present. In order to continue bringing this immense knowledge of lands, cultures, and belonging into the future, it's crucial to keep Indigenous languages alive. As children learn from the linguistic and cultural histories of their people, they bring knowledge forth that can educate and foster sustainability measures based on the lands that they live on. Through centuries of knowledge and stewardship for the land, biodiverse species, native plants, and habitats have been respected, and we've cultivated knowledge that has brought forth the best ways to protect and encourage sustainability in a given area. Just listening to these centuries of knowledge and stewardship for the land, and listening to the teachings and promoting of Indigenous protected and conserved areas can actually drastically improve the quality of protection and nature and foster sustainability mechanisms for years and decades to come. I think that governments, NGOs, and businesses should all be taking children's voices into consideration in decision-making processes, especially the ones that would consequently affect them. This definitely includes environmental matters, as children are stewards for the future, and involving them in the protection of the environment now is vital for their generation and for generations to come. Indigenous people have countless insights to the lands that their ancestors have inhabited for centuries. This includes how to best protect the land and its species, using plants for medicinal purposes, and respecting and cohabitating with wildlife. This provides a unique opportunity to learn and engage with local Indigenous populations to advance sustainability, which ultimately would positively contribute to many national and international targets and goals. This includes the Aichi targets, UNDRIP, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, just by simply having the government and stakeholders involve Indigenous people and youth in decision-making and sustainability efforts. The stories that are passed on from generation to generation should be heard better in order to advocate and advance multiple sectors and targets. It is becoming increasingly clear that the protection and revitalization of Indigenous cultures and languages around the globe is integral to environment and humanity's overall well-being. So that's just my perspective from a sustainability perspective on how youth are super important, integral to just advancing all these different targets and sustainable development goals. So, miigwech for listening.
Thank you very much, Lena, for those comments and kind of bringing back the conversation of the centrality of the importance of young people, children's, Indigenous people, Indigenous children's participation in all decision making, from governance structures to businesses and communities. And I think the world is in transition with various international conferences and so forth. I think this agenda for including Indigenous children in Voices for Change in governance structures is crucially important. And I wish you for the wonderful work that you are doing. Marie-Claire, do we have some time for reflective thoughts from any of the other speakers on this wonderful, very rich discourse we've had so far from the 5 speakers?
I think what we could do, because I know we are over time and there are some people who have to leave us at exactly what is for me 1 p.m. and what for others will be 6 p.m. or wherever you are in the time zone, the end of the hour. So what we might do is ask if people who have questions could please type them into the Q&A, not the chat, which is for introducing yourself and commentary, the Q&A. And then we have one more very, very honored and distinguished speaker who is joining us, and she could maybe give her keynote, and then we could turn to the Zoom moderators, to Haifa and Odette, to give us sort of a round of 3 or 4 of the questions that have by that time been typed into the chat. And this can include anybody who's actually part of the panel as well. And turn back for closing comments from any of the people who have spoken today before we close. And that should make it possible to
Thank you very much. And very quickly from me, a great honor to have facilitated that wonderful, rich discussion. Thank you, everyone. Over to you.
Thank you. Would you like to introduce Dr. Rhoda Muse as well, who is online with us? Nishan, you could introduce her if you wish. And if not, I'm happy to as well, because we're so happy that she's with us. I will go ahead to introduce her. And I would like to just underscore and recognize that the mentor of Nishan Gunasekara, who has worked, of course, in Sri Lanka to help with conflicts between different groups, conflicts that have been very dangerous and very hard. And he's worked with the Children's Trusteeship Council that has helped children to learn how to be stewards of the earth and also to be able to recover from the terrible violent conflicts that his country has faced. And he was guided in that work by one of our joint mentors, Judge Christopher Gregory Weeramantry, the Vice President of the International Court of Justice. Judge Weeramantry has passed on. And before he did, he founded this Voices of Future Generations Children's Initiative, together with the then Director General of the United Nations Education, Science and Culture Organization, Irina Bokova. And Judge Weeramantry reached out to his contacts across the United Nations And together with Irina and with the others from the United Nations Environment Programme, from the United Nations Economic and Social Council, and the United Nations Development Programme, among others, he helped to make this initiative possible. We are continuing this work that Jadwir Mantri, together with the amazing child authors that Addie has joined, and that Bella and Sydney and Nico as child ambassadors have also joined, and also the alumni and the mentors, people like Shaylin and like Elena and like Portia, who have come forward to help the children, because as we all know, children listen most to older kids. So when you say something as inspiring as you did, Shaylin and Elena and Portia, I know that that means more to Nico or to Adi than probably anything that as an adult I might say. and it's so important and so meaningful that you're here with us and that you're able to speak. But our partnership with UNESCO has continued through the years with different people joining us and different people working together. And I would like to thank and honor Jadwir Mantri for his insight in reaching out to Irina, in reaching out to Rhoda's organization, and in speaking forward this link that we all wish to continue and that we all wish to build on even as we move forward. I would especially, in that light, be greatly honored to introduce the Secretary General of the Canadian Commission for UNESCO, who has joined us today. Prior to joining the Commission, Ms. Muse led economic development of official languages minority communities at the Department of Innovation, Sciences and Economic Development Canada, where she also worked in the area of cooperative and social innovation. She also served as the Ontario Regional Director for Status of Women Canada, and she's a school board trustee and the vice chair of the Conseil des écoles publiques de langue française de l'Est de l'Ontario, CEPEO, and a member of the board of trustees of Hôpital Montfort. I can't think of a better person to be joining us today to express the strength of the partnership and the connection that is there among these amazing children and child authors and the UNESCO, and to address us today in this event. Please.
Thank you, Marie-Claire. Yes, hello everyone. Bonjour, Kui. I'm honored to be here with you for this International Roundtable on Indigenous Children's Voices and Rights for Sustainability. I'm joining you today from the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. The language of this territory is Anishinaabe Mowin. Today, we will celebrate the work of Adeline Abbey, Sophie Newman-Ting, an impressive 9-year-old from British Columbia, who has already written and published her first book, Finding the Language. Congratulations, Adi, on this remarkable achievement. I would also like to acknowledge the Indigenous child ambassadors, Bella Moriso and Sydney Winter, and the honored chairs and speakers taking part in this event today. As we prepare for the UN Decade of Indigenous Languages starting in 2022, what better way than to celebrate through the launch of Adi's book that speaks of language reclamation, culture, and the environment, all from the perspective of a young language learner, and perhaps a future teacher and a knowledge keeper. I would like to share how I personally reclaimed my own language when I was as younger as Yad. I'm originally from Djibouti in East Africa. Djibouti was a French colony until 1977. The whole education system was in French, with no space, neither tolerance for native languages that were Somali and Afar, and still are. Then, this is when I went for holidays in Somalia, the neighboring country. And I noticed that Somali language was not only spoken, but also written and taught in schools and university, and that the BBC radio had a huge Somali component. There, I went through summer school to learn how to read and write in Somalia. This totally changed my life. As Monique put it earlier, it changed my trajectory. I was able to learn more on my culture and be proud of who I was. I work for the Canadian Commission for UNESCO. UNESCO stands for the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. This important UN organization was created after World War II to help rebuild the world's educational systems and safeguard culture in all its forms. Since its creation, UNESCO works for world peace, and its activities are guided by the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The Canadian Commission for UNESCO carries out UNESCO's work in Canada, working in an inclusive and intergenerational manner is a priority for us. We view youth as key partners. We recognize that the concerns of worldviews of children and youth should help shape both our present and our future. We have a youth advisory group with 25 members from across Canada who are involved in our events and initiatives. We also have a UNESCO Schools Network where students, teachers, and school administrators are committed to taking action in their local community on global issues that impact all our lives on our shared planet. Giving space to Indigenous voices and perspectives, in particular Indigenous youth and children, is important to us in our work in Canada and internationally. Truth and reconciliation is a long-standing priority for our Commission. But we also have the responsibility to promote the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in Canada. Through our work and in partnership with Indigenous peoples, we seek to understand what the implementation of this declaration looks like in education, science, and culture. In 2019, throughout the International Year of Indigenous Languages, we learned that for many peoples, the languages are essential for community and individual well-being. We also learned that young people are a key priority in the maintenance and revitalization of Indigenous languages across the globe. The insights and activism of children and youth must continue to help guide this work. Regarding the 2030 Agenda, we have now fully entered the decade of action. A reminder that 2030 is less than 10 years away. And when it comes to all the 17 SDGs, this most unusual year has shifted our views on what our world can and should look like. It starts with engaging with children and youth. It starts with linking learners and educators from around the globe so that we can learn from one another through events such as this one. And if we do it right, it ends with SDG 4, education for all, with no one left behind. In closing, I would like to congratulate once again Addie for publishing her first book at such a young age. We look forward to promoting your book to our networks and to collaborate with all of you again soon. Merci. Thank you. Jimmy Guesh.
Thank you very, very much. And thank you especially for your commitment to education, to science, to culture, and to advancing the work, especially of young women and leaders and children who have such important voices in this area and are starting finally to be heard. And it is through the efforts of international organizations like UNESCO that these cooperations are possible and that these partnerships can continue throughout the years. So Sydney, Bella, Addie, Nico, and also the older leaders who have spoken to us. And I include the mentors and graduates like Elena and Shaylin and Portia who are here online, as well as all of the team members. Thank you for all of your work, and thank you for supporting these amazing young people. It's very important, and more important now today than ever before. Now, I know that on the Q&A, we have some questions that have been raised from different leaders and different others who are across the world participating from many countries. And I will turn to our Zoom moderators, especially to Haifa and to Odette, if they could select 3 of these questions, or 3 or 4 of them, and convey those questions to us, so that those who have stayed with us and are listening online, we can hear from you, your voices, your messages, and then we will turn back to those who have spoken and see if anyone would like to make some closing comments before we turn to Professor Carrie Newman, who has agreed to kindly close this event. I hope that Haifa or Odette have the
Some of the questions have already been answered on the chat. I will just take one question that is directed to all speakers from Talia Hardy. And she asked, how do you think non-Indigenous people can best support Indigenous communities in their local areas?
Oh, that's a good one. That one's quite close to my heart. If I hadn't had friends like Carrie and Wayne and mentors and guides like Monique, who I've met throughout the journey, I wouldn't have a clue how to answer that myself. So please, if we have any of our speakers, maybe I would start by asking if Wayne and Monique would like to help answer that. And then if Carrie or Bella or Addie or Sydney or Lena or Shaylin would like to come in, please just signal.
Super. Yeah. Could I just get a fulsome reread of the question again? Thank you.
So Talia asks, how do you think non-Indigenous people can best support Indigenous communities in their local area?
Yeah, local support is definitely the key there, in the sense that each First Nation in Canada or New Zealand, Australia, the United States, around the world, each First Nation has their own autonomous governing capacity. So what's right, for example, for the Musqueam Nation in British Columbia is not necessarily right for the Moosomin First Nation in Saskatchewan. So one has to listen and deal and dialogue directly with the communities affected, the First Nations affected, and listen to the issues, listen to their concerns, and listen to how they can partner, collaborate, and work together at achieving the local needs of the people. So that would be my best advice is listen locally and act locally. Thank you.
Would one of our other speakers from today have anything to add to that? Monique is always a good guide because she speaks and gives presentations to Indigenous and non-Indigenous children, and she's changed the hearts and minds of so many people. But I can also see Shaylin is here, and maybe given the work you do that I'm so impressed by, there would be something you could add.
Yeah, this is definitely dear to my heart because I have to reconcile in myself being both Algonquin and Jaganash. So yeah, the work that I do at the Kawartha World Issues Center, we really focus on centering Indigenous leadership in advancing the Sustainable Development Goals. So that involves building mutually beneficial and meaningful relationships and partnerships with Indigenous communities, not only the chief and council, but also the community and the elders and knowledge holders that they identify, because the chief and council system in Canada is a colonial created system. So we have to really work on engaging communities and respecting, as Wayne said, I love the way you put it, the different protocols that each community has, and really paying attention to those and learning those is really important. And I'm going to put a link in the chat for everyone. There's an Indigenous collaborative programming report that we created on guiding people who want to partner with Indigenous communities on how to do that in a respectful way.
Thank you, Shaylin. Absolutely perfect answer. And we really appreciate the link that you were placing. I now have, together with Nishan, the honor and the pleasure to slowly begin to wrap up and close this event. I think to help us in the closing, we are very, very happy to be joined by Professor Carey Newman, who is, like some of us online, the very proud father of the person who we are celebrating, together with the child ambassadors for their work today. Professor Carey Newman Hayalthkin Geme is the Odin Professor of Contemporary Art Practices of the Pacific Northwest at the University of Victoria, a multidisciplinary artist and a master carver. Through his father, he is Kwakwaka from the Kekwokum, Gitskam, and Wawalabiye clans of Fort Rupert, and Coast Salish from the Cheam of the Stroklo Nation along the Upper Fraser Valley. Through his mother, he's English, Irish, and Scottish. In his artistic practice, he strives to highlight either Indigenous, social, and cultural and environmental issues. And one of Carey's major works, The Witness Blanket, is made a giant, beautiful cedar screen of items collected from residential schools, government buildings, and churches across Canada, dealing with the subject of reconciliation. I should also disclose that Carey has been my friend since, I don't know, we were both about 14, working together on these issues on the west coast of Canada, and I'm so honored to consider him a friend, and so proud of Addie for her amazing book and for the beautiful totem pole that, together with the children from her school and Carey and others, they carved at Oaklands last year during the pandemic. So please, Carey, if you could help us to begin to close this event, that would be wonderful.
Thank you, Marie-Claire. Yeah, I think we were 14 at most when you started the Environmental Youth Alliance, and that kicked off 30 plus years of keeping in contact with each other and seeing each other whenever you're in town. I, like Addie, am coming to you from Lekwungen, the traditional territory of the Lekwungen speaking people. And I just want to acknowledge, first off, Bella, Sydney, and Addie for their wise words. It does make me incredibly proud that my daughter Adeline wrote a book and is sharing it with the world. And I love how, Monique, you identify that as an act of bravery. I also want to acknowledge Portia for both times that you spoke. You have so much to add, and Wayne, wow. It's really wonderful to hear you speak with such passion about things that I care so deeply about. And then to the panel, I come to these things and I learn every time. And one of the themes that kept arising when we're thinking about Indigenous people today seemed to be about relationality, about connection with land. And we have a word for that in Kwakwala. The word is awitnakyola. And if anybody's downloaded and pre-read the book, then you might see that word in there. But awitnakyola means to live in good relationship with the land, air, water, spirit world, and everything in them. And what I think of when I think about that word, about that way of living, is a different relationship with land. I think that Western ideology, capitalism, industrialization have led us to think of our relationship with land as being one of dominance, property owners, and that the land is there to serve us. But we're not above or greater than the land. In fact, we are completely, entirely dependent upon it. And so when I think about these words, decolonization or reconciliation, I think about the need to transform our relationship with land so that we don't think about
it as being something we control, rather something that we are one with, as is embodied in the word Owitnakula. I also think about what the word Indigenous means. I've heard some people talk about Indigenous as being from, being born, and I've even heard it used in a way to erase Indigenous presence by saying, well, my family's been here for X number of generations, so when do I become Indigenous? And I have an answer to that, and I think that the answer was sprinkled up throughout the conversation today. I think that being Indigenous means being of rather than from. When I read through Addie's book, when I hear the things that people are saying about grandfather sun and grandmother moon, and I think about the way Owitnakula speaks to being part of, I think I realize that being Indigenous means that your language, your culture, your music, your way of being, your entire governance and legal systems or legal orders come from the land. So when I think of the word Indigenous, I think of it meaning being of the land. And for me, I'm Kwakwaka'wakw, and that is from the northern end of Vancouver Island. And the words that we have are derived right from the land. And on my other side, I'm Coast Salish from the Stalo Nation. And the same thing is true there. Our ways of being come from the river that we grew up on there, that generations lived upon there. And so that's kind of what I wanted to leave you with in my thoughts about this, everything that I've heard today. But I did have one other point that I wanted to share, and it came from Edward's thoughts about success, about resilience, and needing to have those stories as part of. And I wanted to articulate a nuanced difference between success and resilience, because it's pretty easy for us to fall into the idea of bootstrap, that we were able to pick ourselves up and do well regardless of the circumstances that we're faced with. And that's quite different in its effect on people than the underlying resilience of Indigenous peoples, of Indigenous languages and Indigenous cultures. One is pointed to as almost an excuse for the way in which Indigenous people have been treated. And the other one is a celebration of the strength and fortitude of Indigenous people. And so when we think of these things, think about, rather than someone succeeding despite the odds, think about what it takes to succeed through incredible injustice. And so I'll close by congratulating again my daughter Adeline, as well as Bella and Sydney. Thank you for your words. And I also want to make note of Nico's very passionate and wonderful speech, and say that I think that we all have an incredible amount to learn from these children, from these youth, and from the wisdom that they carry. So I say Gila Kasla to everybody who tuned in today, and thank you to all of the people who've made this possible.
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you, Addie, and thank you to everyone who has joined us. I want to especially thank all of the partners who are in your program. I believe that Sherry may have another engagement that she has to slip away for. So she may not be able to do the closing prayer, but I understand from Haifa and Odette that we have someone willing to still help us to close. Haifa, is that correct? I saw it slip across the chat along with millions of other messages.
Sorry, but if it's going to be longer than 5 minutes, I do have to go. So just let me know, and that's okay.
You're here. Okay. We're waiting. We're ready for you.
She's here. She can do the closing now. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. I'm not gonna speak in my language, but where I come from, I've been taught by the older people that I've been fortunate to be around that we don't really do a closing because the work will continue, and I'm just a human being. Those spiritual beings are the ones that really lead and do everything for us. And I know there's different teachings. So for me, I'm not going to do a closing, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to render a children's song that came to my my auntie. And there's a story about how that song came to her, how it was gifted to her in the dream world. But it's about our children and how we're to take care of all of our children. And we say the words to that song is which is all our children, the care that the love, the kindness, the teachings, the compassion that we learn from them. And I just wanted to say that my oldest granddaughter is going to be 20 years old September. And when she was born, I have to say that she's the one who taught me unconditional love. She's the one who became my greatest teacher. So I truly agree with all the words that I've read, that our children are our greatest teachers. They carry that wisdom, that knowledge that comes directly from creation, from that sacred being, that Kijemanito, because they're so close to that being. And where I come from, they say that the law of how we look after our children, Creator felt that because our children are a sacred gift from Creator, they kept that law for themselves. The other laws they delegated to other spiritual beings, but Kijemanito kept that law for themselves because of how much they love children, how they know our children are a sacred gift right from creation, and our children are still so close to that spiritual, that sacred realm. That's why you heard all of these young people share with us today. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to render a song for you, and that it came from that Manituokwe, that spirit woman, that sky woman, that song that was gifted to my aunt. So I'm going to render that song. Wewe nikono wene meko kita beno chimia. Hey ya haya we yo we haya we yo hey yo hey ya haya we yo we haya we yo hey yo. Wewe nikono wene meko kita beno chimia. We ya haya we yo we haya we yo hey yo. Miigwech, and it's been a great honor, a great privilege. Sorry for making a quick exit again, but I really want to acknowledge all of these wise, brilliant Indigenous children. Chimiigwech, chimiigwech.
Thank you so much to everyone and to Sherry. And I will turn it over to Odette and to Haifa to say not closing, but rather to say we will see you again soon, because they're great. these children, everyone who is involved in helping to make this happen, are part of a journey together, and that journey does indeed continue with, as Carrie said, resilience, and a recognition and an honoring of that resilience, and of the hope that children and youth activists and everyone together can bring. Odette, Haifa?
Before we conclude, on behalf of Voices of Future Generation team, I would like to thank Elder Shirley for the opening and the closing prayers or the closing song. Also to the Voices of Future Generation team that are not in this panel, but they worked very hard to have this event organized. They are Sarah, Allison, and Kiara, and Haifa that is here too. Thank you to the Canadian Commission of UNESCO for all your help and for having us with this, helping us with this new book and our new link that we have together. We also want to thank all the other speakers and participants around the world for all the people who join us, no matter what their time is. And Haifa is going to tell you about our next event that is coming in September.
Sorry. We're so happy to announce that our next roundtable on education, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and the World Sustainable Development Goals will be taking place on September 8th in partnership with the CISDL, Canadian Commission of UNESCO, University of Cambridge, and McGill University. We've shared the Eventbrite link on the chat so that you can sign up. Thank you so much once again to everybody who has tuned in, and we look forward to seeing you at the next event. Thank you.
Thank you to both of you and to the entire team and to all of the partners who have joined us here today. And thank you especially, like everyone has said, and congratulations to Addie, to Bella, to Sydney, and indeed to all the child authors who have written in this initiative. I should especially recognize and highlight that Addie, Bella, Sydney, Nico, you are very, very warmly welcome to join the event that is coming in September. The other child authors from all over the world will be there too, and the child ambassadors, and they will be so happy to welcome you and to chat with you and to continue building the friendship that will sustain all of you as you work together for a better world and for sustainability and for justice. Thank you, and good night, good morning, good afternoon.